This is episode 3 of the Autocar India podcast. I'm Sandeep Srikanth, and back on the pod by popular demand, joining me is Hormaz Surabji. Hormaz, one pod without you, and we started getting requests to have you back. So you're back, and a very important thing to talk about as well, the Hyundai Grand i10. We have a little review up. We'll have a detailed review of it in the Autocar show later this week. But what can you tell us about that car?
Well, I think, it's quite interesting. In fact, I think Hyundai have literally pulled a rabbit out of the hat because we didn't expect the i10 to grow this much, and it clearly has. And I think really they're trying to squeeze it into a gap which so far doesn't exist. There's a gap between the i10 and the i20. That's where the Grand i10 is going to fit. So I think clearly, strategically, it's quite interesting how Hyundai are looking at every possible niche in which to fill. And I think the Grand i10, really, it's actually closer to the i20 than the i10. In fact, more than calling it a Grand i10, I think it should be a mini i20 because it's got a certain amount of road presence, it's got a lot of features. So clearly, there's a lot, going for this car.
And given the fact that the Grand i10 is so much bigger than the i10 itself was very spacious in the cabin. So is the rear a lot more spacious in this car as well?
Oh, definitely, especially in terms of legroom, because, the wheelbase has been increased by 100 millimeters, and that itself manifests itself in much more passenger space. Even the luggage space is much more. So clearly, this is a car which is a whole class bigger. And it feels that way too. And in terms of width, it's not as, let's say, wide as an i20, that's for sure. And but clearly, I think, sitting five in this is really not too bad. Yeah.
And what we haven't talked about, but the big deal with the launch of this car is, of course, the 1.1 litre CRDI diesel engine. Hyundai have been wanting to bring a small capacity diesel in for the longest time. What are your first impressions of this engine?
Yeah, I think honestly, this is really the big talking point, the 1.1 diesel, which really comes lower down. You've not seen you've got the Beat, having a diesel engine, but no other car of this size really having a diesel. So it is, a new tech engine. But how does it feel? Well, it's really not very powerful. I mean, in terms of performance, a little disappointing, really hasn't got the punch. It's quite drivable and quite tractable. So really, it's there for city driving. If you're not in a hurry, you're not driving with any sense of urgency, it does do the job. It's fairly refined once you're on the move, but at idle you do have that 3-cylinder thrum, which is really quite distinctive, and it's quite a sharp one, that too, but it's not really too disturbing. Gear ratios are pretty well chosen. Again, it's geared a bit on the low side, but again, its engine really isn't a very punchy engine, and it does run out of breath quite quickly.
But fuel efficiency should be excellent then, I'm assuming.
I think this will set a standard for fuel efficiency, because what we can assume is that, it's a small capacity engine, 1.1 liters. It's got one cylinder less than the standard fare of 4-cylinder diesel engines, which are of higher capacity. So that all points to an engine which is very, very fuel efficient. Of course, Hyundai haven't really disclosed what the fuel efficiency figures are. But I would be surprised if it wasn't one of the most fuel efficient or the most fuel efficient diesel we have today.
You were saying priced at about around the 4 lakh mark. So what would the competitors for this car be?
Well, I think the natural competitors would be something like the Ford Figo, which really sits at the lower end of the premium, hatchback segment, or I would just say hatchback segment. You've got something like the Maruti Ritz as well, which sits again below the Ritz, below the Swift. So I think clearly these are the obvious competitors. The WagonR to a certain extent. So I think, there's a lot over there. There's going to be a lot of overlap. And I really think the challenge for Hyundai is to just see where to position this car, because there clearly is a lot of overlap. So it will also cannibalize sales possibly from the i10, to some extent from the i20 as well. But I think if it takes away from the competitors, which is what Hyundai wants, I think that's going to be the objective they're hoping for.
Moving from the Grand i10 onto another interesting subject that I wanted to chat with you about, which is small capacity diesel engines and the increasing trend towards small capacity diesel engines in India, especially given the way our fuel pricing is skewed at the moment. We had General Motors try the sub 1 liter diesel engine with the Beat diesel. How do you really downsize these engines effectively? Because I remember when VW came in, you had the 1.2 liter 3-cylinder engine, but there was that little bit of 3-cylinder thrum. And how are they going about downsizing these engines to meet these Indian conditions and these Indian challenges, perhaps?
Well, I think actually downsizing is actually a huge challenge beyond a point. I think right now the comfort level really is about 1.3 to 1.5 capacity four-cylinder engines. They work well. I think the minute you try and get smaller, you have a couple of challenges. One is, in a smaller car, the noise levels are always greater. But I think the bigger challenge really is cost. Because when the car gets smaller, your sticker price automatically gets lower, but the cost really doesn't come down because clearly even when you downsize these engines, it doesn't proportionately cost the manufacturer less. And I'm sure that even with Hyundai, this engine is not a cheap engine, and I'm sure their margin on this must be very, very small. I think it's more strategic coming in like this because this engine of theirs, the U2, is a very expensive engine. It's built to European standards, has a lot of very high-tech parts. And when you give that in a 4 lakh car, or let's say 5 lakhs for the diesel version, the margin on that is very, very low. So clearly, your margins are very tight. Making profits out of a small diesel car is very difficult because it's very hard to price it at an appropriate point.
You were talking about four-cylinder 1.3 liter engines, that Fiat Multijet engine called DDIS by Maruti, Quadrajet by Tata Motors. That's really the engine in India. But what's next for a company like Maruti especially, because they've been using this 1.3 liter engine across the lineup all the way up to the SX4. But are they also looking to come below that capacity perhaps and build a smaller engine to compete with these at the entry level?
Well, I think clearly that Maruti is definitely going to be developing its own diesel technology. From what I understand, they're struggling right now because they don't have assistance from anyone. They're locked in with something with Volkswagen, which makes it difficult for them to partner with any other OEM for any other technology. So that there's a legal wrangle which is keeping them from going outside very easily. So right now they are choosing their diesel path on their own. What we hear, the first engine is going to be an 800cc two-cylinder engine, but I'm not sure if that's going to get into a car.
And final question, we're talking small capacity diesels. We had some spy pics recently of a diesel nano that's coming out. What can you tell us about that car?
I think that diesel nano has been on the cards, but I think again clearly Tata Motors is facing the same challenges anyone else would face when you really are trying to make a budget diesel. A is the NVH or the refinement levels, which are much more difficult to control in a smaller car because you don't have a big car to really absorb all the noise. A lot of it is transmitted, so noise is a big issue, and again cost is a big issue because diesel engines are not cheap. They have to be built to kind of withstand high combustion loads and stuff like that. So certain cost which has gone into it. So even though it may be a small engine, an 800cc three-cylinder diesel engine, it's not very cheap. So again, I think Tata Motors is having an issue of meeting the price point. Again, typically with small cars, your running is very less. So sometimes I think the petrol has more of an advantage or more of an appeal when you're really looking at the budget end of the market.
Something like, say, what Nissan are doing with Datsun, they're very clear 1.2 liter petrol is the beginning for now.
That's right. I think Datsun have taken the view that diesel does not make sense at this end of the market. And they have just kind of said no diesel for the Datsun Go, it's just going to be a petrol. And they are looking at kind of, offsetting the petrol disadvantage or the diesel advantage by having a car that's very light, which makes it very fuel efficient and very easy to drive and fairly refined as well. So all these factors kind of going in the favor of a compact petrol car.
One final not so serious question, Hormuz. We've beginning of August now. September is of course the mega anniversary issue. This year it's the 14th anniversary issue of Autocar magazine. The office is absolutely buzzing. Without giving away too many details, what can readers and viewers expect from the magazine?
Well, I think there's going to be our usual package of scoops, first drive, some very interesting features. So I think, the usual stuff. I think, I don't want to give away too much, but I think it's going to be a good read. A lot of interesting features. And like with every anniversary, it's going to be fun stuff as well. We're going to be doing some different things which we don't normally do in a regular issue. So it's going to be a lot of fun stuff, the lighter side of cars, which we are looking at as well.
Well, I've been also trying to film a lot of those fun features that Hormuz has been talking about for the YouTube channel and perhaps also for the Autocar show. So keep watching us through the month of September. It's going to be pretty interesting. That wraps up this edition of the Autocar India podcast. Send us your feedback. Tell us what you thought about the podcast. You can tweet Hormuz, you can tweet me. And of course, head over to the Autocar India website for all the details and scoops and watch out for the September issue.